my fillings. I took a bite of that. Yeah. That is so like, I had a few drinks. You could do all the time. I'm a fallen angel. Look, I've got trouble with my camera.
Tell Roger we heard about the cross-eyed ruling outside that
Hey! Excuse me, boys. Pardon me, boys.
Yes, my mind just made a little run about it, but I won't say it. No, it was clean. Story. We're starting off with a spooky story.
No pressure.
From MEG.
Thank you. I want to just advise you that I give you a warning before I tell you the story. Anybody who's got a dicky heart should really go outside. Alright, there will be noise. But for the rest of us, we'll all just stick with it. This story is actually a legend. And a legend is technically, some of it is thought to be true. It comes from Dunfermline, the town where I was born. And as Sue said, she never knew what Dunfermline was. It's a funny word. Anyway, Dunfermline is quite a religious place, and lots of churches, lots of kirks. And I remember as a girl guide, you'd never guess that was a girl guide, going into churches to do special ceremonies like, Armistice Day and Girl Guide Day and all this jazz. And we went to one particular church that was beautiful, kind of not like the big shed we had in our village, but a beautiful church in the town of Dunfermline, near the town centre, with a big statue at the front of somebody called Ralph Erskine. Don't know a damn thing about him. But inside, I remember it was beautifully painted, there were pillars, and a veranda. You'd call it a veranda, we didn't call it a veranda. And upstairs, they went all the way round, beautiful wood panels. And another lot of seats up there where the congregation could sit on three sides. Beautiful, very sparse, no stained glass windows. It was a kind of modern church for its time. And the statue outside was of its most famous minister, Ralph Erskine. And this was the Erskine church that we had the special ceremony in. And there's an interesting legend that goes with Ralph. And it goes something like this. Ralph's father was a minister, like himself. Ebenezer Erskine lived in a parish outside Dunfermline, little country area, and he was very, very religious. Only had the two boys, and he had a wife that passed very quickly. So he was left a widower. But as luck would have it, I don't know how they do it, but often as ministers, we get to shake hands of a few people going out the door. He managed to marry a very young woman called Marion Halcrow, who was beautiful. And they were married only 3 months when she took ill and died. Well, he was beside himself. The two boys from his other marriage were being looked after by one of the servants in the house, because of course he had a big manse. And that was status in those days. If you had any sort of brain at all, you could go to the ministry or you could go to soldier, and most of them chose to go to the ministry. Or the doctrine in Edinburgh, but that's another story. So, here we have Ebenezer Erskine absolutely bereft at the loss of his second wife. This beautiful young Marion, she was so beautiful. And when she was laid out in the front room, in the coffin, and the sexton and he and the servant were there, he couldn't believe that she was gone. She looked so beautiful. And as he looked at the coffin, he thought he saw her lips quiver. the doctor had declared her dead and was summoned again. He held the mirror to her mouth. He felt for any sort of movement at all, but she was declared dead. And he was so distraught that he insisted that as beautiful as she should be buried with all those beautiful necklaces that she had, with the rings on her fingers, with her earrings in, and she laid in her best dress, her wedding dress, and was to be buried in the cemetery. Now, they do say that the cart that took the coffin was pulled by a grey horse. A good horse, a solid horse, but when it came to the stream, the burn, the brig, before the graveyard, the horse pulled up, would not go another step. Well, it caused a bit of furore. All the people walking solemnly behind and the horse in front just refusing to go. They ended up taking the coffin off the back and carrying it up to the graveyard. Now the sexton, John Carr, had dug a fine hole. It was perfect, it was right size, right depth, and there was a service said over the coffin. It was lowered in, there was a lot of crying, and people left the sexton to cover over the grave, and they went back to the manse for a very quiet farewell. John Carr didn't really fill in too deeply, too thickly, too heavily. He had seen those jewels, and you know, a sexton didn't make much money. And so he waited till it was dark, and you know, I mean, back in here we're not to appear for another 80 years, but people had to get by the best way they could. So he got a candle, and he went to the graveside, lit the candle, and he dug up back to the lid of the coffin, and he prized off the lid, and he went and slowly he got the necklace off. He got the earrings off her ears. But the ring on her finger, that big gold band, he couldn't get it off. So he pulled and pulled, but then it wasn't happening, so he took a knife from his pocket, and he took that hand and leaned a finger over the edge of the coffin, and he started to hack it off to get the ring. Well, the corpse let out the biggest shriek, and he ran for his life. The woman had not been dead. The shock had brought her back to life, and here she was in her wedding dress, all dusty and dirty. She climbed out of the hole and she made her way home. She walked in the dark home back to her husband, to the manse, and they do say, here's the husband sitting at one side of the fire, grieving. Here's the servant on the other side of the fire. The bairns are in their bed, and there's a knock on the door. And Ebenezer says, if I didn't know better, I'd say that was my wife's knock. And when the servant went up to open the door, there she stood. She thought it was a ghost and fainted herself, the old servant, clean away. The wife picked herself up and came into the room and was reunited and explained to her husband what had happened. She had some blood on her hand, but she still had her ring on. Well, you can imagine the to-do. That was the end of the sexton. But they do say what was really unusual is that that son, the next son that came along, was Ralph Erskine, the famous minister in Dunfermline who has a church named after him. And they do say that he was born after his mother died. And this one I'll have to join in with. It's a wee song and you'll get the chorus, no trouble about it. An old woman sat by a graveyard door. Ooh, ah. Okay, I'll start again. An old woman sat by a graveyard door. Nobody'd ever sat there before. Three ghosties came and sat down near. The old woman shook with fright and fear. The woman to the ghostie said, will I look like you when I am dead? The ghosties to the woman said,
Meg, Phil, don't encourage
Now go, Dickie, huh? Behave.
Let's use this one. There's only sticky heart there.